software just adds more problems sometimes than it solves. So I don't believe that there is a best in class G2 or Forrester Wave. I think it's all smoke and mirrors when it comes down to it, because it's really about your implementation, where you're at in the journey from a SaaS complexity perspective. So Salesforce or HubSpot or Gainsight, I don't think there is ever a right answer to that.
Welcome to Change Enablers, a podcast by Tango. Sit back, relax, and listen to some of the brightest minds in operations and enablement.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Change Enablers podcast. I am super pumped to have Demar Amacker here from the Muse. He's the VP of B2B Operations at the Muse. We've gotten to know Demar over the past couple months. He did a webinar with my colleague Rocco, and for good reason. In 2022, he was recognized as one of the top 25 RevOps leaders by Revenue.io. He's an expert at data, systems, all that nasty stuff that sales teams get into and have to deal with. We're going to talk more about that today with a very specific example. But I couldn't help but notice when Demar joined the pod today, he's got his little SF 49ers hoodie on. I've got the Golden Gate Bridge behind me. It's actually the week leading up to the Super Bowl. You're probably going to hear this at a later date, but big time for San Francisco, Demar.
Yeah, I feel like I only record webinars with Tango when my teams are in the championship. I don't know if you remember, my last podcast with Rocco was the week of the World Series, and I was cheering on the Diamondbacks, who I am an alum of as well. So hopefully, better luck this time than the first result. But I won't hold it against Tango either way.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's one of these things where, two data points starts to make a trend. So I'm really pulling for the 49ers so that when we bring you back the third time, you're not like, no, you guys are bad juju. I need my teams to win. But I am rooting for the 49ers. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I've got Bills paraphernalia around my desk. I am just so sick of being beaten by the Chiefs. So I need somebody to beat the Chiefs. And so I'm hoping it's you all.
Yeah, it's a revenge matchup for us as well. So hopefully we'll get over the hump this time.
Yes, you got this. Well, cool, man. Well, I'd love to jump in because I think you've got a pretty interesting anecdote to share that we're gonna really explore the ins and outs of this particular story. But before we jump into that, I always like to start with our opener, which is, you might be a little biased, right? But the question I always ask is, what do you think is the most underrated operations function? Now, given that you're in RevOps, you might be biased. We can even change function to like role, responsibility, however you want to take it. But what do you think?
It's probably process improvement for me, when it comes to sort of the things that no one really wants to do but everyone needs to do. It's designing sort of the right set of actions and processes that are going to lead to the best result. Reducing friction across teams, creating efficiencies, but process design is not something that I think a lot of people, want to spend a lot of time on, because it's tedious and, it takes a lot of peeling back layers of the onion to figure out the core of the problem. And I think that's why a lot of times we stay so surface level with problem solving, is we don't get to the core of the why. So I like to go through this sort of like 5 whys, level of questioning, just to figure out because oftentimes you get to the point of like, oh, we've always done it this way, right? So it's like, it's painful to make changes, and it's painful to, it's obviously appropriate. We're on the Change Enablers podcast, but I think change is hard for a lot of people. And the person usually tasked with that is someone central in operations. And I think that for me is, now that I've moved to a more broad business operations role at the Muse, I see the challenges that operations faces across the business. And it's not just revenue all the time. It's, sometimes it's implementation and onboarding, and sometimes it's, more top of funnel. But I do think that as you're fixing the process, you have to find the core of the problem. And I think that's sometimes the hardest part of it is getting to the root of the issue.
I totally hear that. I mean, even with process design too, it's one of these like delayed gratification events where it's like, all right, I'm going to invest all this time up front that will pay off over the longer term, right? But I think what's so challenging sometimes, especially when you're putting out fires and you're running from one area to the next, is like you just don't have that time dedicated to the stuff that's going to pay off in the long term. You've got all these short term fixes that you're trying to pull together. So I really appreciate that perspective, and maybe we'll jump into that with a little story. So when we were prepping for this pod, I appreciated an anecdote you shared, and that's what we're going to explore today. But to give everybody some of the context of your role and what you're doing today at the Muse, maybe at a high level, paint the situation for us. You talked a little bit about something that gives a lot of our end users anxiety: implementing, maintaining Salesforce. But there's something unique in your situation. Can you just share that with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined the Muse about 6 months ago now, we had just gone through a Salesforce merger of two instances, which was a lead up of about a year of kind of two Salesforce instances existing alongside of each other when the Muse acquired a company called Fairygodboss and moved put those businesses together. They kept some of the stuff separate, right? And so part of the challenge that I came into was I got here right after the merger of the Salesforce instances happened, and didn't get to participate kind of fully in the planning and preparation work for such a big undertaking. And not to shame anyone that was in place before I got here, but they decided to do it from a cost savings measure over a sort of weekend rather than the recommended sort of 6 to 12 kind of weeks of really project planning. So it was two instances of Salesforce with separate processes, separate users, separate everything, separate flows and objects, and 5 to 10 years of maturation from a Salesforce perspective on either side. So all the junk, right? All the deprecated fields, all the deprecated flows and processes just got meshed together. So it was broken on both sides, and then it became a third, even more broken mess when the two instances were put together.
And again, we don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but did you know you're inheriting this project? Was that part of the interview process? It's like, hey, we're bringing a lot of systems together here. You're the guy.
Yeah, I love a challenge, and it was something that was made very clear to me that it was going to be a bit of a cleanup project when I got here. They were about 2 months into the sort of I like to call it kind of messy world when I got here. The transition was facilitated by an expiring Salesforce contract. So ultimately, it was time came down to it, and they had to make a decision really quickly to shut one off to avoid the increasing cost of multiple Salesforce instances. So I think it was short-sighted in some ways to look at the cost immediately for a $50,000 call it done the right way transition, as opposed to having someone come in and play whack-a-mole for months after the fact to clean up the messes. So I do think that the proactive approach would have been probably less heartburn across the business, but I think cost savings won out.
Yeah, and also too, like if you're truly trying to like merge these two cultures and two sets of goals and systems and missions and all these things, like you kind of want to keep it under one house. But when you were looking at the two when they were sort of separate, how different were they? I mean, there's obviously some familiarity. Oh, I know this is Salesforce, but given the personalized nature of the tool, I mean, did these things even look the same?
I mean, down to even so obviously the out of the box, the Salesforce objects, those matched up. Right. Accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, those were being used in similar fashion. Then at the field level, they weren't always, right? So even something as commonplace as something like an account type had multiple iterations over time of definitions of how that field was being used on both sides. So the flows and dependencies and all of the downstream sort of connective tissue, I like to call it, that as soon as you have one object that has a lookup relationship to another object, you've now created a connection, right, across multiple objects. And then you times that by 10 objects across 10 lookup fields across those objects, and you have as I described, this kind of mangled mess of yarn that is sort of trying to be connected. And at some point, those associations were all, someone was aware of all those associations, but as the Salesforce, instances change hands from a RevOps perspective, as the strategies change from a sales leadership perspective, things just have changed so much from the original intent of that. So documentation wasn't there, and we're just kind of chasing the cord back to the wall, kind of one object at a time, to really understand what is the same on both sides, what is different on both sides, and then what are the sort of newly created kind of synapses that are there because we put these two things together and tried to quickly say, oh, well, that looks like type on this side, that looks like type on this side. Let's put those together because that clearly is going to be the same definition, even though the pick list on one side has 10 options and the pick list on the other side has 5 options. Those pick list values now have the third option. Like the third scenario is now one pick list has 15 options that are a combination of both, right? So it's stuff like that wasn't fully baked before the merger was happening, which led to, as I mentioned, lots of games of whack-a-mole, trying to decide, does this flow, should it get turned off? Should this, this validation rule be deactivated or reactivated to ensure that just the business logic across the whole system was not stepping on each other, like on itself, just from a process standpoint, but also there was no standard of what do I do? Like, what do I need to do my job at the end user level? So that was partially, there's all the ancillary stuff that, that there's a loss of trust, a loss of, faith in the system as a whole. And then, that's where you end up with a loss of usage.
Yeah. There are so many things I want to unpack in there. The first being, of course there was, if there was no documentation, at least there was a subject matter expert, right? There was one person you could go to figure out the whole instance. I'm saying that sarcastically.
No, yeah, and that's the thing is there was Salesforce is often compared to sort of a Lamborghini in your driveway that can do a lot of amazing things, but you have to have someone there that is giving it the right care and maintenance and driving it the right way, and that wasn't the case for either the Fairygodboss or Muse side. So it's the ownership and accountability around these things fell across multiple functions: marketing, sales, account management, and so operations was really there to unify the vision, the standardization of the process for even something like lead flow or opportunity management, which seems like it's kind of commonplace, moving pipeline stages and things like that. Every sales team is doing some iteration of that, but unless it's clear and concise and understood by the end user, there's going to be breakdowns, right, in the in the process, and that's where you get the data quality failing.
Yeah, totally. Well, I don't have a Lamborghini in my driveway, but maybe when we launch this podcast and we hit it big, man, there's going to be 2 Lamborghinis in some driveways somewhere. Really helpful to think about what it means to bring together kind of these two companies, because I feel like these types of systems are probably the things that are often overlooked. And then there's also probably a decision you have to make of like, are we going to take one team's culture around process and how they handle it and make the other team conform, or vice versa? Or are we going to pick and choose the best? I mean, how did you kind of approach that? And was there maybe, once you did that inventory, was there a glaring like, oh, this side has it down, let's do it that way? Or was it a little bit of a mismatch?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a mismatch, taking the best from, either of them. One example that comes to mind is the Muse was using a more 3D version of products and price books and opportunity line items and things like that, like really backed by the Salesforce CPQ. But the Fairygodboss side was more two-dimensional. So it allowed us to bring Fairygodboss products into a more 3D view, but there was a lot of growing pains when it came to our looker reporting, like our just overall kind of business retention data was uh, just wrong, for lack of a better word. Like it was we were underreporting on the products that we weren't including in certain rules and things like that, because they just didn't have that dimension in the other Salesforce system. So looking at trend, historical trends on data, it was really hard because the data, there was no apples to apples. So once we got to a place where the data could be apples to apples for any future deals, it was an uplift, right? Because the 2D view versus the 3D view was obviously much more insightful. On the flip side of that, account management wasn't really something that the Muse team was doing inside of Salesforce. They were using kind of a hodgepodge of different account management tools, including Excel and Google Docs to manage their accounts. Whereas there was much more of a strict task kind of management, account management workflow that we adopted from the Fairygodboss side. So while the team, had many differences in kind of their approach to Salesforce, there were enough common threads because it was an acquisition of a competitor. So a lot of the what we're selling was similar. So that made it easier, but I would say the hardest part was the things that we took for granted that we thought would be the same across, and had to actually rewrite new standard logic around, because it wasn't right in either side before. Like it was like a chance to say, okay, scrap both, let's start from square one and say,
Yep.
This is how we want it moving forward, because now we have new sales leadership here, we have new marketing leadership, we have new just overall executive leadership that wants to put in their processes and their kind of culture. So it was an opportunity to really reset on things that we couldn't come to agreement on, one side or the other being kind of the better practice.
That totally makes sense. I want to shift a little bit to think about some of the stakeholders of this. So you have sales reps, sales managers. You mentioned a new leadership team. How was this? And I want to focus just on the existing system before we get to the solution. But the existing system, how is that affecting these folks?
So I think it starts with the end user, obviously, right? If they don't feel like they have a clear understanding of the expectations set by them by the sales managers and the account management leadership, then there's going to be a breakdown in sort of the what's being done at the end user level. So there's the first disconnect, right? And then those sales managers are then accountable to our executive leadership team, who they're being counted on for forecasting and retention numbers. But when none of that data is really accurate, it kind of it leads to sort of a breakdown between what they can communicate with their executive leader, right? So I think I think at the end of the day, it has to, if you don't get it right, good data in, good data out kind of thing. So you have to get it right at the end user level. But as far as the stakeholders impacted, if it's bad at the foundation, right? You're building a bad process on sand, it's going to fall apart very quickly. and sometimes good leadership can mask that and can, do what they can with what they have. But the deeper the questions that you have, the more sophisticated the strategy that you're trying to, implement, the more you need, like, it's, I'd say, like, one of the most sort of difficult questions for an operations leader or, operations, professional to hear is a question that they don't have data to support retroactively, right? So it's like, oh, I don't have a time machine and I can't jump in and say, what we, let's go track in real time all of our lead sources, effectively. But I could put something in place now to make sure that for everything in the future, so it's like, shy of a time machine, you really have to have, you have to have some foresight and some patience from the people that you're working with to get it right moving forward. But that's the, there are many an anxiety, ridden night where I was, trying to solve problems that I didn't have the time machine to go back and solve for. So it's, that I would say that's the hardest thing is getting, getting at data that you didn't have the proactive foresight to go and put in place, and then, scrambling for the answers that you can't answer because you don't have the data to back it up.
So I'm gonna keep adding to our list. We need Lamborghinis. We need time machines. So
we need time
those
machines.
are the two things so far. By the end of this episode, we're gonna have a laundry list of things that, Demar, you and I need. So Rocco and I actually chatted about this a couple of weeks ago on our State of It Change Enablement podcast, and I think one of the tough things too with reps is they're not incentivized. They're incentivized to close deals. They're not incentivized to like find the workaround to get the right data in, right? Like no rep is given commission based on like correct data entry. And so what that means is like you need to make it turn off your brain easy to follow a process, to enter data correctly, to have confidence in that data that then, managers and leadership can also have confidence in and start to trust. And so, as you're sort of revamping this process and thinking about, okay, let's combine these, let's come up with a solution. How do you make it just dead simple for reps to follow this new process?
So I think it's twofold. It's establishing documentation and really writing down black and white, like what the steps are for a given process. So, it's SOP development. But the second piece of it is giving them visibility into, we call it our sort of you don't, like, it's the board you don't want to have your name show up on, right? It's the out of compliance report around opportunity fields not being filled out or lead fields not being filled out or things like that help with process adherence. But that can only go so far because then you just stop going and checking that dashboard. So you really do have to collaborate and get the buy-in because oftentimes as operations leaders, we are not the ones enforcing with the end users those rules because we're not their direct managers. So you have to have a partnership with sales leadership and sales management across the board to be able to align on what, if we only have them do one thing, like what's the end goal here? Like what are we having them get done? And B, how do we get there, as simple as possible? Removing steps, removing fields they have to fill out, and then automating, finding ways that we can, simplify, have field updates happen sort of in the background. And the biggest thing around that all at the end of the day is, reps, they do have one goal, right? Like making more sales. But if it's not crystal clear to them as to the why you want them, like the bigger picture of, you need to fill out this, this opportunity record with, to a T with these fields so that it enables XYZ, like where there's where it just feels pointless as, just like, monotonous tasks that they just have to add to their day. It doesn't get through, right? But if they feel like they're a part of the bigger picture, they can start to understand the strategy behind it. I've had some of my best breakthroughs when they like, you see that light bulb of, oh, they get it, right? I'm not pulling them up the mountain, right? Like I'm actually, I'm behind them on this, helping enable them, because they get it now. They don't see it as just more process for process sake.
I think that's a great takeaway. And, the things I heard from you is like, obviously define, document, make the process visible, showcase the why, like why do we expect you to do this? Which is, it's just missed so often. It sounds so straightforward, but so many teams miss that. And then, the last piece, like you said, drive that process adoption. Once they understand the why, they know what it is. How do you make sure that they're following along? I think those are all great takeaways. So we sort of painted the picture of what you inherited. We painted the picture of, how we get these stakeholders, to kind of follow through on realizing a new potential with one instance. Talk to us a little bit about the solution. Like where did you end up? What was the outcome of this project? And the more specific, the better. I mean, our audience knows this type of stuff inside and out. So don't hesitate to go deep here.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, what we ended up with was a much more simplified version of our schema and our just overall Salesforce deployment. Because what we realized was there was just a bunch of bloat, a bunch of deprecated objects, a bunch of deprecated stuff in there that was just clogging the pipes. When we realized, we really simplified it down to like, are we able to do these things, like get the job done with half the objects in place, right? Like these dependencies that are tied to these lookups and these related fields and all this stuff. Like, is it necessary to do what you want to do right now? If not, let's pare back all of the stuff that's not mission critical and then build it back up, because at the end of the day, we were starting to hit limits on object limits in Salesforce, because we just built this snowball up and up and up and bigger and bigger. But then we didn't realize that the core of what we were trying to do is still the same, of, push more people through the sales cycle more effectively and more efficiently, and treat them, obviously better as customers. We realized we could do all of that with a much more slimmed down version of what we had. The different managed packages that we had over time with different apps that we'd have, Bombora and whatever. So we simplified what we were working with. So we just looked at every object and said, do we need this object? Do we not need this object? And then once we had eliminated the objects we didn't need, it was easier to go down to a field level and understand within Salesforce, where is this being used and how can we reduce the overhead of this whole footprint. Because if you saw the schema when we started, it was hundreds of objects connected to hundreds of objects, maybe even thousands of connections at that point, exponentially. So for us, we had to simplify it. We had to get to a place where everyone understood all of the ins and out, like inputs and outputs of the data, like within Salesforce, because with it being our source of truth, and just one of the places where data kind of flowed through, we had to make sure that we had all objects that had flowed in from other systems that we weren't using. It's like no one, like 5 years ago, no one even knew that like what this object was doing anymore. So we just got rid of it. So simplifying down to a place where we could kind of build it back up from what do we need today to really scale the right way.
This has come up. Now, we've had probably a few guests talk about pursuing simplicity. Complexity can be tempting because it feels smarter or harder. I don't know what we have all these biases that we say, oh, if we make this thing more complex, it's going to either be more tailored, more robust, or something. So, I mean, in your opinion, like, what prevents us from taking a step back sometimes and saying, hey, what if we just made this easier? What if we made this simpler? What if we made this clearer? Like, what's stopping people from doing that?
So I think it's the work that we started with, going back to the very beginning, right? It's the understanding the core of the problem that you're trying to ultimately solve. And everyone has, and that's the sort of mountain that I'll die on, the hill that I'll die on. I don't believe that there is a sort of, best in class sort of, G2 or Forrester Wave for real. I think it's all smoke and mirrors when it comes down to it, because it's really about your implementation, where you're at in the journey from a customer SaaS complexity perspective. So Salesforce or HubSpot or Gainsight or Tatango, or I don't think there is ever a right answer to that. That's the hill I'll die on. I think that it's all about where you're at in the journey, what problems that you're trying to solve, and software just adds more problems sometimes than it solves. So I think you got to be very intentional about looking at yourself in the mirror, not copycatting just because someone else is doing something. Like, does that serve your larger need? And if not, like, pare it back, because at the end of the day, we only have so much mind share that we can really like dedicate to. I have 10 tabs open right now with 10 different sales tools. Like, it's overload, right? And I can't stress enough that simplicity actually, focus does lead to better results. And if you can do like the In-N-Out example, right? Like, they do burgers really, really well, and they don't try to do chicken sandwiches. They don't try to do sloppy joes. They don't try to do hot dogs, whatever. Like, they do burgers really well, and like that's what they built their model on. And so, like, I feel like we are trying to do too much as operations professionals a lot of the time, because we've become so niche. Everyone's trying to carve out that they're part of the tech stack. But I do think that you have to be intentional, and you have to sometimes say no, because it's just not, it's not, it doesn't serve the business adding that one more tool.
Totally agree. We're speaking the same language. And I appreciate that you shared that, that's the hill you'll die on. Cause I tend to agree. And I just keep hearing this theme come up with our guests as well. It's a common thread across a bunch of companies. Looking back kind of at the example that we talked about, from your time at Muse, I was wondering, are there any learnings that you wanted to share from that? Any advice you'd give to people listening to this and saying, oh my gosh, we have the same situation? Like, what would you advise them to avoid? What would you advise them to do?
I think that nothing can be done alone, right? I think you have to get the support of the users at the end user level. Like, you have to have allies across the entire sort of work stream. So I think allyship and really asking the deeper level questions. It's not stopping at the second why, that maybe is, oh, well, we've always done it that way. Or, so you get to the third, it's like, why have we always done it that way, right? And it's like, oh, because, at some point when we made the decision, it was a cost decision, right? And it's like, oh, well, okay, well, let's start from there, as opposed to starting from, that's something that like just always been that, it's like. And I feel like being not afraid to make changes for, because I think sometimes you inherit processes and you inherit things from business logic from previous RevOps professionals or BizOps professionals. And I think people are so respectful, right? They don't want to mess up what was already in place, or they don't have the time to really examine if that process is working effectively. And I think that's a problem, right? We don't have time, because we get so stuck in like, we want to do the next thing. It's like, sometimes you got to look back and figure out, like, because what's the old adage? Like, if we don't understand our history, we're bound to repeat it. So it's like, how many times have we gone in these weird cycles of like, oh, well, that was a problem we solved already, but then it's come back around as another new problem. But it's not. It's just rehashed itself.
Like, operational inertia is, I feel like, a widespread issue across companies, because it's exactly like you said. People are respectful. People also just assume like, oh, well, those are the rules. Rules are rules. And it's like, well, somebody made those rules up at some point, right? That could be you. There is just so much inertia in how things get done that I think folks fail to to take a step back sometimes and say, okay, well,
Yep.
like you said, like, what is the why? Like, why are we doing this? And going deeper and deeper and continuing to ask those whys.
I think that's a symptom, though, of where technology businesses and SaaS businesses are today, right? In this growth at all costs sort of mindset. And I think it's sort of the symptom of that being, oh, we have to go out and do more, and we have to go out and we have to, we have to re-innovate and whatever. It's like, we don't like, and so oftentimes when people build their 30, 60, 90 plans coming into a new role, the first 30 days is sort of, it's on paper as, oh, I'm gonna learn and I'm gonna assess, but like the pressure in those first 30 days to get quick wins, to come in and make a change, and it's you almost can't afford to be thoughtful because the business is moving faster and faster and faster, and your expectations are growing. And so I think we have to give the remit to operations, because if operations professionals aren't going to stop and take that step back, like, who is, right? And so I think the onus really needs to be at the leadership level to give that lease to the operations professionals to move slower, so that the rest of the business can maybe move faster.
As a founder, as someone who did a lot of stuff in the beginning just to set things up, and was out of my depth in a lot of areas, but I was like, hey, you know what? We got to do something here, so we'll go do it. I feel like there are moments, and our team's pretty good about this, but there are moments where I have to remind folks, who come to me and say, oh, but that's like the policy, or I want to make sure I wasn't like not doing this the right way. And I'm like, well, hold on. Whoever set this up was just setting it up for it to be there. Like, there could be a new way of doing this. Like, someone set the policy at some point. We can reset that. But no, I think what you mentioned about leadership sort of offering that signal of like, hey, we can always revisit the way that we do things if we think that it's going to prove valuable, I think is a really good way to kind of close the episode. I do have one last question for you, a real zinger. Who is someone that you follow, whether it be social media, you read, otherwise, that makes you better at your job?
I mean, I think that the beauty of operations is that it's a very peer-driven sort of function. So everyone's probably had similar challenges at some point in their journey, whether it's at this company or that company. So I think I say it's the community that I get to plug into. So I'm really plugged into groups like Rev Genius and RevOps Co-op and Wizard of Ops, because it is a shared set of problems. At some point we're all going to go through something that someone else has, and if you can't lean in on your network to help, for just a quick, how would you solve this? Like, you're doing it wrong, because we're all like, everyone's out there, just trying to make each other better. But that has led me to being able to to find the voices within the community that I actually really appreciate. So people like Jordan Henderson, he's a RevOps leader that I really find insightful. He and it's very approachable types of insights. So Jordan, if you're not following him, and then like I said, just plug in with these communities that are doing amazing work behind the scenes, whether it's a channel focused on Salesforce specifically, or resource tools and resources. Like, there's so many ways that you can give back, but also get out of these organizations. So I think that's the one recommendation I'd have, is just get plugged in with the ops community.
Awesome. And my good buddy Brad Smith, who set up Wizard of Ops, shout out to Brad. Demar, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I think this is going to be a great one for the audience. I think people are going to learn a lot from this. I think a lot of people are going to relate to this one pretty deeply. So appreciate you taking the time, spending more time with Tango, and go 49ers.
Thank you, Ken, for having me. And like you said, go 49ers. We'll see if it is bad luck or not.
All right. Talk to you later.
Later, buddy.